1 week ago, Supercars wrapped up their annual visit to the Gold Coast, and I feel like I say this far too often, but the action was just okay, wasn't it? It was nice to see some different winners up there with Cameron Waters and Brody Kostecki, but the racing itself wasn't exactly edge of your seats. And that's what I want to chat about today, the first of 3 things, in fact, in my very delayed Gold Coast review. So let's jump into it. So the races were solid enough, but both seemed to follow the same trend. On Saturday, it was fairly good, fairly close out front and competitive, but Waters found a way to skip away towards the halfway point of the race, ultimately going on to take that victory. And then on Sunday, we once again had a really close battle up front, but Kostecki also managed to find his legs and pull away. Waters did seem to have a bit of a late race charge going on with some interesting strategy from that team, but unfortunately some front bar damage seemed to take the wind out of his sails. For me, the biggest shame of the weekend was Chaz Mostert. He encountered technical issues on the Saturday and then some team errors with the refueling on the Sunday, and that's a big shame because despite all those issues, that car seemed to have some real underlying pace and he could have been a cat amongst the pigeons at the front. So it's a shame we didn't get to see him deliver his potential this weekend. These latest 2 races in the championship have just really cemented my beliefs when it comes to Gen 3, which is fundamentally, I think the product is good and has potential, and we see that potential, I think, in practice and qualifying with lots of intensity, but that same intensity, unfortunately, is missing from the races too often. The drivers are certainly able to follow closer in terms of aerodynamics, but it does feel like the tyre continues to let them down, and fingers crossed we do see that improve next year. All right, let's get a bit controversial and talk about the biggest flashpoint of the weekend, which had to be Grove Racing dobbing in their fellow Ford competitors, Tickford and Dick Johnson Racing. That resulted in fines and a loss of teams championship points for both of those outfits, and that was after they were found guilty of not having their wheels in the correct spot during the pit stops. Now, I've seen a lot of fans frustrated that this rule is just overkill, although I must admit, I feel and understand why it is necessary. You don't want teams playing games with each other, making it harder to get in and out of pit bays in already tight pit lanes, especially if the consequence is wheels potentially flying down the pit lane and hurting crew members or volunteers. Where I do get the frustration though, and I do empathize with a lot of people, is that it sounds like Supercars and Motorsport Australia have been fairly lax in their punishment and monitoring of this rule, and it's only taken a team like Grove Racing to actually speak up in order for it to be looked at seriously. Of course, I'm not there measuring where teams are putting their wheels, but that is the general vibe and the frustration that seems to have come out of all of this drama. Of course, there is a political dimension to all this as well, because Grove Racing has effectively done friendly fire against their fellow Mustang runners, and given the challenges Ford has had in the championship over recent years, it does feel like the last thing they need to be doing is fighting amongst themselves. On the flip side, I do kind of admire Grove Racing for being the pariah and acting in their own self-interest, even if it has come across a bit petty. For me, that's created some drama and some storylines that, frankly, I feel the championship sorely needs. And the championship is my final talking point because only 2 remain. Cameron Waters and Chaz Mostert are now officially out of the hunt, and it will come down to a battle between the 2 Red Bull drivers, Will Brown and Brock Finney. A bit like last year, it must be said that the odds are still very much in the favour of one of those drivers, this year being Will Brown, but as this weekend proved in the Gold Coast, even one mistake can put you in some precarious positions during the race, especially around another brutal street circuit like Adelaide. So it might not go down to the wire, but I'm still very interested to see how those 2 Red Bull drivers cope with the pressure. For Brown, it feels like he just has to get through the weekend safe and clean, whereas Brock Finney needs to go for broke. And given that the team's championship is fully secure now, those 2 drivers can act purely in their own best interest, and hopefully that results in some interesting action at the final round of the season.